as they say at the Global Chamber. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Connie Kadansky. I am the advisory board chair here for the Phoenix chapter. So I get to see Doug more than many of you do. And we have a big event tomorrow. And also we have brought in this sales roundtable. And we are definitely looking for sales leaders, just like our speaker today, Zach. And Zach is the guy who people that are tasked with international sales growth. They call them when they are willing to take a little help to achieve explosive growth. So listen to these impressive numbers. Zach has sold in over 135 countries over the past 35 years and has onboarded over 1,000 distributors. He has worked for startups at NASDAQ, 100 companies, and a $5 million company. Zach lives in Chicago with his family and his corgi Wingit, and he's a certified pit master, and he is one unique individual. Okay, Zach, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Connie. Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to jump into this. I will say at the end, but I'll also mention this. It is pretty easy to find me. I have a website called Global Sales Mentor. I'm on LinkedIn. I post quite a bit on LinkedIn. So if for some reason you pull off in the middle or something happens and you still want to ask me a question or you want to find me, feel free to find me and I will try and answer your questions. Let me see if I can get this to change. Okay, now this is not working. Shoot, I worked on this. I thought I had it working. Give me 1 second, because for some reason, my PowerPoint isn't coming up. Okay, sorry about that. One little technical glitch. Okay, wait a sec. Now, let me see if I can get this to work. Whoops, just a sec. Sorry, I actually thought I had this working before I started.
If you can, if it doesn't come up on yours, you can email it to Connie and she can put it up on hers.
Yeah, you know what? Connie, give me 1 sec. I'm going to do that.
Yes. It's Connie at Exceptional Sales. Connie at Exceptional Sales. Yeah. And while we're trying to figure that out, who here wants to share what is it that you are hoping to hear today in this presentation? You showed up for a reason. Carla?
Hi, Connie, I'll go then. Hi. Really, I've showed up because obviously the experience of Zach of what you've just been talking about is immense. So I've been in sales for a long time as well, mainly based in the UK, dabbled in, international, but not to that extent. So really, I'm here for the wealth of knowledge, from an expert by the sounds of it.
Ah, yes. And the world of sales has been turned upside down on its head.
Yeah, many transformations.
Did it show up there by any chance, Connie?
On my email, not yet.
Okay.
Hi, Zach. Cesar here. I just sent you an email. You can reply to that and send us the presentation as well.
Great, thanks. Sorry about that. I was pretty sure I had. It's a pretty big.
Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm setting it to Cesar just as a backup.
Okay, here we go. This looks pretty interesting. So I'll start the slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so let me share my screen here. This slideshow from the beginning. Okay, go for it.
I mean, yeah, okay, thank you. Just 1 second. Okay, perfect. All right. So I'll just tell you, I had a client come in a little while ago, and this lady had about 20 years sales experience, MBA. She was the head of international sales for about $100 million company in the Northeast of the United States. They were selling about 10% internationally, about 10% growth year after year for years, which a lot of people would be happy with. And she came to me and she said, look, I'm about 10% of the total company sales, and I'd like to be more, but I'm growing at about 10%. The domestic guy is growing at about 7.5%. I am never going to catch up with him. It's going to take like 50 years before I catch up with him at this rate. What can we do to accelerate that? Connie, sorry, this is going to be a little awkward, but I'm just going to keep saying your name. So I essentially started working with her, and we took a good look at what her organization was doing. I went into depth with her distributors. I interviewed her distributors. I looked at her SOPs. We looked a little bit at what she was doing, Connie. And I started working with her on a coaching basis. So for about 2 years, I coached her on a weekly basis. I got my hands involved in a few of the things, and we did really well, Connie. I gave her a lot of tools that she could use that she hadn't been using before. We talked a little bit about different tools to manage her distribution channels, different tools to drive up engagement of her distribution channels. Connie? And the result was a dramatic increase in sales. Okay, so we went from, oh, sorry, not yet. So a dramatic increase in sales. She had been growing about 10% a year for more than a decade. We doubled that in less than 2 years. The velocity of growth dramatically increased. She got a presidential E award. If any of you are familiar with that, that's the award you get for exceptional export growth. A lot of money, and she was made district export council head for her state, which is a really, really cool career thing, right? So basically, like I said, or like Connie said with the intro that I had given her, people who are looking to grow internationally, but are also willing to ask for a little bit of help, are really my sweet spot. And let's dive in a little bit into what that means. Connie. Okay, so the first thing I like to say is we all talk about how great it is to grow, but growing internationally or trying to grow internationally and screwing it up is actually just about the most dangerous thing that you can do as a company. And what happens typically is that if you try to grow internationally, you end up throwing so much resources into it that if you don't take it seriously and you don't do it well, it can seriously damage your company. And I always tell people this, it can damage your company to the point where the company very often can be at risk of being acquired, or can actually even go bankrupt, or can be crippled for years. And one of the things I always tell people is, if you're going to do this, you have to do it seriously and not just dabble in it, right? You have to really do it with intent. Connie? This gentleman is one of my heroes, and I use him a lot when I'm thinking about how I coach. His name is Takiro Kobayashi. I don't know if anybody in the audience knows him or has heard of him. And I can't really see everybody to see hands raised in this configuration, but I'll tell you his story very quickly. In the year 2000, he was in his early 20s, unemployed. He had never eaten a hot dog in his life. Japanese kid looking for a way to make money, and his girlfriend read about the hot dog competitive eating contests in America that had a big prize, and she suggested to him that he might want to compete in competitive eating. So he looked at the rules and he started practicing, and the rules basically said that you could take any liquid with you on stage to drink, you could take any condiment, and you had to eat the bread and the sausage. It didn't say anything about eating them together. It didn't say anything about how you ate them. So he went up on stage with a cup of oil and a cup of water. He put all the sausages in the oil. He put all the buns in the water. He swallowed the sausages whole because they were lubricated. He could suck them down and swallow them. And then he took the mush of the buns and he drank that down. And he was able to eat 50 hot dogs in the time that the world champion at the time ate 25. Now, why do I talk about him when I'm talking about international sales? Is virtually everybody I meet is doing it wrong. And what you really want to do is sort of think about what you're doing and see if there are ways to dramatically improve what you're doing. Connie? This is David Bransford. I don't know if anybody has heard of him. He is at the other side of my coaching spectrum. He was the coach for the UK bicycle team. The UK bicycle team for 100 years won absolutely nothing. And they brought him on board and he was able to get them both Olympic medals and Tour de France medals. And his whole philosophy is to try to identify little things that can be improved and then improve upon them. And if you improve something 1% every week, you're going to hit 100% improvement very rapidly. And in a couple of years, you're going to see thousands of percent improvement, okay? So if you basically take a look at little tiny things and you're constantly working at improving them, you're going to hit dramatic growth numbers, okay? So this is my intro. Now we'll jump into things. Connie? So when I start with people, I always say, let's ask why, who, when, what. Connie? Why? Why do people buy my product? And I know this might sound a little silly, but if you do really well in your domestic market, very often you never ask yourself this question, right? And it's critical to understanding understanding how you're going to expand internationally. And what do I mean by that? I can tell you, for instance, that I worked with a product once where the idea behind the product was to use it for a transport ventilator, okay? So the idea was, well, people will buy this to use in an ambulance to move people from place to place when they don't have a steady electrical source, okay? But as we tried to expand globally, we realized that most ambulances have a good electrical system, so they don't necessarily need a ventilator with a battery. But a lot of hospitals in poor countries don't have good electrical systems. So the primary reason people were buying this ventilator was because their hospital did not have a good electrical system, which meant when we thought about that and we aimed at countries, markets where the electricity wasn't reliable, our sales grew dramatically. Okay, so that's the type of thing that if you understand why people are buying your product, it helps you understand where you should be selling, where you should be focusing your messaging, where you should be focusing your sales. Connie? Who buys my product? And again, if you're selling okay in the US and there's a $300 million consumer market here, very often you don't have to dig into this too much to keep profitable. Okay, but what do I mean by who buys my product? Well, what would be the ideal customer profile? What is the ideal demographic? Is there a point in their life that they buy your product? Is there something that might trigger them? Okay, and by those things, we get a feel for building up what the correct markets are going to be for my product. Connie? When do people buy it? And there are two main ways of looking at when you are dealing with global expansion. One is a compelling event, in a personal compelling event, or what I like to call a micro compelling event. What does that mean? Something that happens to you as a person. For instance, you buy your first house, or you have your first kids, or your kids leave home, right? Those are the type of things that are like a micro compelling event. It happens to me, and this is what triggers buying Zach's product, for instance. The other type of compelling event is something that happens to a country, okay? I was in India when the law came out saying you had to have a motorcycle helmet if you were a passenger on a motorcycle. And suddenly, people were selling literally hundreds of millions of motorcycle helmets, okay? So when a law like that comes out, or some type of a change happens to a country, that is what triggers a macro compelling event, which is a good indicator that that could be a good market for you. Connie? And the last thing I think is, what do you want to achieve, right? And from my perspective, what you want to achieve is, what would success look like for you? Okay, so for this particular client I was talking to, she wanted to grow about twice as fast as she was growing without making major changes. She did not have the possibility to change her product. She didn't have a lot of resources, but doubling the velocity of her growth would put her in a fantastic position, because what she really wants is, before she retires, sometime in the next 10 to 15 years, she would like to be on par with the domestic sales. So if we could get her enough improvement in sales growth, then she was achieving her goal. For some people, what is getting a footprint across the global footprint? I had a client once who reached out to me, and they wanted to sell their company, and they knew that if they were selling successfully in 40 or 50 countries, it would double the value of their company before he sold. And he had about 3 to 5 years before he wanted to retire. So the what was to build up a robust. Could I ask everybody to mute, please? Could I ask everybody to mute, please?
I would put it in writing and then get him to call you, because you are drawing you're taking a stand.
Yeah.
So Elise or Cesar, can you? Okay, go ahead.
Great. So basically, the what is what, before you start off, before we start this journey, you want to understand what you want to achieve. Is it revenue, quick revenue? Is it long-term revenue growth? Is it footprint growth? I very often, one of my clients right now, they've developed a new product for the US market, but they still have a very robust product which they want to sell internationally, because their sales domestically have dropped off considerably because it's not the most advanced technology anymore. Their new product is better, but they figure it's going to be a fantastic product for different parts of the world. And we're getting revenue in with a product line that if they weren't selling it internationally, they might consider it dead. Connie, please. Next one, please. So let's talk a little bit about choosing markets. And what I find is virtually everybody I talk to has done this in a sort of haphazard way. And what do I mean by that? You decide as a company you're going to sell internationally, and one of two things happen. Either the guy who's in charge of selling internationally he says, you know, it would be really cool to visit Japan and France. So they decide to go to Japan and France, and that happens way more often than anybody wants to admit. Or somebody reaches out to you from Portugal or Bangladesh or Singapore and asks to be your distributor. And now we're suddenly in a market which we don't necessarily know if that was the market we wanted to go to. So I always suggest to people when I'm starting out is the first thing you want to do is once you know what your ideal customer profile is, let's see where there are a lot of people like that. Okay, and I'll give you some examples. Like very often where there's a growing middle class, that's a good market for some products. Or where there is a large enough number of people who consume luxury goods. Or a market where there are a lot of women at childbearing age, or a lot of women just entering childbearing age, that kind of thing. Those are the type of indicators that would help you identify a good market. And I typically go to the CIA World Factbook and the World Bank Factbook to find information about markets that I want to go into. Those are really, really good sources. Another really good way of identifying this and playing around with it is figuring out among people who sell similar products, maybe your competitors, maybe not your competitors, but people who are selling to the same demographic. See if you can figure out where they're selling and where they're selling most. If a company is publicly traded, all you really need to do is buy a share of their stock to get a copy of their shareholder annual report. I'm guessing even nowadays with the internet and stuff, those things are available. You know, at one point or another, somebody has probably made those available even without buying a share of stock. So if you can figure out where people are selling to a similar demographic, it's a great way to identify markets. And what I do, Connie? What I do is I like to identify my top priority markets, the markets I know I don't want to go into, and then markets that would be okay if I wanted to go into them, but I'm not rushing into them. And very often I'll bundle them together. So if Peru, for instance, is a really good market for me, I might decide that I'm going into Chile and Colombia and Ecuador, even if they're not quite as good, just because if I'm already dealing with Peru and I'm traveling there and maybe I'm doing translations of packing materials or that kind of thing, then I might as well work with a couple of countries nearby, as long as they're, say, tier 2 and not tier 3. Okay, so that's typically the way I do this. And I like to start off with targeting a minimum of about 20, 25 countries, because some of them aren't going to be as successful as I want, certainly not in the short term. And if you target 1 or 2 countries, you're bound to fail. There's a high probability that you're going to fail. And then somebody will say, well, you know what, we tried it. Let's just give it up, right? They're not going to think we tried it, but we only tried it in a very limited way. Okay, Connie. Now, once you have found your markets, and again, I'm going to say very, very strongly, I really do not suggest going into markets randomly or letting people pull you into markets, distributors or even customers pull you into markets. That to me is always a mistake. The next thing you're really looking for are distributors. Now, before I go into that, I'll say something else about countries. Is a lot of the clients I work with and work for are selling already internationally. So what I like to do is I evaluate the countries they're in, and I compare those countries to the ideal customer profile. I try and figure out if I would have chosen to go into them. And I can't really remember a time when I said to somebody, just get out of this market. But what I will do is I'll say, don't put any more investment in trying to grow this market. This market will not grow for you. So what you want to do is just keep your existing clients happy so as not to tarnish your reputation, but don't invest in it anymore. Okay. I also very often when I'm taking over or I'm working with a client who is selling in a lot of countries, is I'll help them evaluate how well they're selling in those countries, because if we can come up with a baseline of what they should be selling, and we can understand if they're selling enough, we can then figure out how we can improve the sales of those distributors. Now let's talk a little bit about distributors, which to me, distribution is really the primary path to success if you're looking at a manufacturing business to business company. And I'll say also, a lot of business to consumer companies too should be doing better distribution. But if you're under $500 million, you probably want to be working through channel partners mostly. And I get a lot of pushback from that. A lot of people will tell me some variation of, but it's not a good fit for my product line, etc. Right? The thing is, it's very difficult to justify from an economic feasibility perspective a direct sales force if you're under $500 million. It is just too expensive to carry a direct sales and marketing force. Whereas if you have good distribution, you can scale indefinitely all around the world if you handle it correctly. So that's why the channel sales organization is such a powerful tool. It is force multiplication. Connie? So I don't know if we're gonna get this work. Can you just hit the button and see if the animation triggers on your computer, Connie? Nope. Wait, did it hit it again? So let's see. And then maybe we'll just, nope. I'm sorry. Can you go back up? We'll just look at this as a picture. So I like to think of my distributors as having 3 characteristics: engagement, competency, and bandwidth. And this little animation, which is right now just a picture, the size of the little blue bubbles represents bandwidth. What do I mean by bandwidth? How many salespeople they can put on the ground, okay? Competency is how good they are at actually selling my product, and engagement is how much they want to sell my product, okay? How engaged they are with my product and with my company and with me. And by driving engagement, we can drive up competency, okay? Because if they don't like my product, they won't learn how to sell my product. Every salesperson for every distributor everywhere in the world has other options to do with their time today. And what I want is every morning for them to get up and want to sell my product. And if I can drive engagement, everything else in my sales organization is going to fall into place, okay? Very often when we look at distributors, we look for the biggest distributor. That's very common. People will get very, very excited about the big footprint. But then the question is, how many hours are you actually going to get? And if you track sales hours in a territory, sales hours will virtually indicate one-to-one your sales. So if you have 2,000 sales hours in 2023 and you're selling $1,000, and you have 4,000 sales hours in 2024, most probably you will be selling $2,000 or maybe a little bit more than that. Okay, so if you can drive up engagement, everything else will fall into place. Okay, next one, please, Connie. Now, what I do, what I like to do is, people talk about a sales process map. I like to take a look at the purchasing map of my end user client customers, okay? And put together a map, and then I will mirror it. What do I mean by mirror it? If I understand how they're going to buy, then how I sell should look like a mirror of how they buy. Connie, can we go up one please? And then one more. Oh, and then hit the button a couple of times. I think this one has pop-ups. Okay, so I like to say that there are 4 primary elements in a sales process. There's building trust, Button, please, Connie. Sorry about that. Helping customers internalize that we can help solve their problems. Finding customers. And the delivery. And depending on your product and depending on the market, one or another of these is going to be the most important. Okay, so if you think about it, very often finding customers, right? Prospecting, the top of the funnel, is the hardest part of what you do. Very often it isn't, because let's say you sell to hospitals. Let's say you're about to go into Dubai and sell to hospitals, right? There are 18 hospitals in Dubai, 20 hospitals in Dubai. It's relatively simple to identify every one of your clients or customers in that target market. So finding customers is not the problem, okay? In some cases, delivery is the problem, right? If you're selling something that is difficult, if you're selling fresh lobster from Maine and you're selling it in Arizona, delivery is probably your biggest problem. So you have to try and figure out what your problem is and how you're going to deal with it. Now, typically, what I want my distributors to help me with is finding customers. I expect them to know the market. I want them to help build trust, okay? Because if I go into Nigeria, me as a white guy, right? This might take me 5 hours of talking to get somebody to give me very, very basic trust. I might have to have dinner with my customer a couple of times and spend some time with him, okay? Same thing in Japan. There are multiple countries where how you build trust is very, very high. What they call America is the land of transactional trust. In America, we trust people faster than any other country in the world from a business culture perspective. You go into a Best Buy and you see somebody in a blue shirt, you hand him your credit card. No questions asked, right? But in most countries, and in the most countries where we sell the most to, if you think about places like Saudi Arabia, like Japan, those are markets that are very lucrative, but the amount of trust that you need is very high. So if you have a good distributor, you are essentially renting his trust. He has established trust in the market. And if I work with him, I now have that trust, which I am paying him a piece of the margin for, okay? And now, what do I mean by helping customers internalize so we can help them solve their problem? I like to talk about it this way because very often I'll see sales trainers or sales leaders, and they'll talk about delivering information. And it isn't about delivering information, it's how does the customer internalize that information? And from a cultural perspective, that is a big thing because, for instance, if you went through the French school system, you will look at slides and numbers and Excel sheets differently than you will if you went through the American school system, okay? So if you are going to present in Europe, you have to be thinking very carefully about how people are going to be looking at the data you give them. Same thing with Chinese people. If you went through the Chinese school system, you will be looking at data and pictures and slides differently than an American will. So you have to understand how exactly to work with your end user customer so that they internalize that information and they understand that you can actually solve their problem. And this is something else that your partner can work with you, your channel partner. Okay, now when you figure this out, you have to decide how much of this work is going to be done by you and how much of this work is going to be done by the partner. Connie. Really sorry I made so much work for you. I promise you that this morning I thought it was working for me. So I always put up a map like this. You can hit the button again. And it basically divides up the sales process through all the different elements. And I'm going to say some of it is going to be done by me or my employee in the field. Some of it will be done by the distributor, and some of it will be done by headquarters. Okay, what do I mean by headquarters? Well, if maybe we do our proposals centrally in headquarters, maybe we have a really, really good system to do remote demonstrations, and it comes out of headquarters. Maybe what we do is the sales guy or the distributor sales guy go out and do the presentations, right? But I want to map this out. I want to understand who does what and what the general expectations are, because when I know that, then I know what my distributor should look like. Okay, Connie, sorry, next one. Again, like I said, I like to think of a distributor as having 3 legs, essentially: bandwidth, competency, and engagement. And every distributor looks a little bit differently, and you have to decide what is the acceptable level of each when you choose a distributor. And I always think this one out. Can I get good engagement from him? Right? Does he have enough bandwidth? Because I might have all the, yeah, I'll tell you a story. I once went to visit a distributor in Mexico, right? Mexico is a very large country, about 1/3 of the population of the US, and geographically maybe about 1/4 of the US. And this guy he was the only salesperson for the company. And we were talking about this was about 20 years ago, before people did a lot of Zoom meetings. And I really said, I don't understand how you can cover this market. And we dug into it, and he couldn't. So we had to find a solution to help him have better bandwidth. He ended up hiring a number of people, but ended up also selling a lot more, right? So you have to figure out what that is. I will typically look at a market, and I don't want to dig into this too long, but I'll typically dig into a market and I'll say, there are 500 or 1,000 or 300 or 10,000 potential people who are my ideal customer profile in this market. Now, when you're selling, say, to hospitals, it's really easy. When you're selling to car owners, it's a little harder to get those numbers right. But you basically figure out, how much bandwidth do I need to sell in this market? Okay, and frankly, it isn't that difficult to figure out if you have a clear understanding of the sales process. Okay, because if you basically say, I'm selling brake pads to automotive shops, or even I'm selling brake pads to wholesalers that sell to garages, you can figure out how many wholesalers there are in Turkey. And then you can figure out, well, a sales guy has 200 days out of the year. He can visit 2 or maybe 4 potential customers a day, which means, let's say he can do 4. That means one guy can make 800 calls a day. How many potential, 800 calls a year. How many potential customers are there? So that number divided by 800, that basically is how many salespeople you really need for basic coverage in the market, for instance. Okay, Connie? And then I go looking for the distributors. Once I've built myself a profile, I know how big he should be. I know what he likes to sell. I know the skills I want from him. Now, very often what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide what he would probably be selling today. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, if I'm looking for a guy who I want him to sell brake pads to the distributors of car parts in Turkey, right, then I'm going to be looking for a guy who is probably selling a similar type of product to those same distributors of car parts to garages. What is that? Mufflers, brake wires, axles, grease? I don't know, but I'm going to try and find something similar. And then I'm going to say, okay, can I find the people who today are selling these products in Turkey? And once I've discovered that, it's actually pretty easy to hone in on those guys and find them. And there are a lot of different tricks that I use for that. I don't know that I necessarily have time, but through LinkedIn, Sales Navigator, through trade shows, you can identify those people. Connie? And then I sort of interview them. Now, going back to my my client at the beginning of this story, so we went through a lot of these processes. Even though she was selling right, we basically went through and we said, well, are you selling in all the right markets? Are you putting the right level of investment in all the right markets? We looked at her partners to see if they really were a good fit and if we needed to change them. And we changed, you know, I worked with her to help her change a bunch of those partners. Okay. And when you're changing partners, I look at it very much like the dating game, like a speed dating situation or a dating situation where I basically say, okay, so I want to ask them some questions. I know what he should be good at. So I want to know if he can answer those questions and convince me that he's good at these things. And I want to do it relatively quickly. But before I do anything, I want to hit him with a really good, attractive pitch from me. Why? Because I want him to want to work with me enough to really work at his pitch, right? I want him to answer my questions well. I want him to put effort into it. And if I don't pitch well, he's not going to. What is a distributor pitch? Okay. All the distributor cares about is, can I make a lot of money from this guy? Is he going to be easy to work with? And can I trust he isn't going to screw me over? Okay, so everything if you think about your distributor pitch, if you talk about the fact that your company was established in 1952 by two little old ladies in Switzerland, nobody cares, right? All they care about is, can they make money? Are you easy to work with? And are you going to screw them over, right? So your whole pitch should be based around that. Now, what do I mean by how do I know that, you know, how can I show that I'm not going to screw them over? Well, what I do, I've been doing this for a while. So I basically say, look, here's the deal. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm connected with hundreds of people who've been my distributors. Look through my connections, find a distributor, reach out randomly and ask them what their experience with me has been, right? You're not going to find somebody who says, Zach screwed me over. I can do that. Now, if you can't do that, you have to be able to find something where you can say, look, the company has this policy. We're only going to work with distributors in Europe. The company has made this decision. We're guaranteeing this. Try and find ways to alleviate their fears. Now, a lot of people forget to do this because they have a great reputation in the US. And they say, well, why should anybody be scared to work with us? We have a great reputation. Yes, you have a great reputation in the US. Nobody knows who you are in Germany. So you have to think about alleviating that fear. And you also have to show them not that your product is made of the finest steel or that you have this really cool design team. You have to show them that they can make money and that it is easy to work with you. Right. And that's the pitch. Once you come up with that pitch, then you ask them questions and then you decide who you want to work with. That's the whole secret to getting good distributors. Connie, next one, please. Hit the button. This might not work for us. Oh, here we go. Okay. So hit the button again. Let's see if we populate this one. Sorry. Yep. So what we're looking for when the distributor is talking to us, right? They're saying, I'm trying to balance the trust and the product profitability. Okay. Now think about it this way. If you are selling, let's put it very simply. Let's say you go into somebody with a big bag of gold and you say, I have a kilo of gold here and I'll sell it to you for $5, right? The profitability there is huge. He might not believe that you actually have gold in that bag, but maybe it's worth a risk, right? It's a lot of big profit potential there. On the other hand, if the profitability is medium or low, right, there has to be a lot of trust. Think about profitability also in the damage to his company and or the damage to his reputation and or the damage to his other product lines. Okay, so if you come in with a product it seems like a great product, but if it doesn't work, it is going to cost a lot to fix the damage to his customers. That reduces the product profitability, which means you have to increase the level of trust to be attractive to that distributor. Okay, this might sound a little fuzzy or maybe a little difficult to understand, but the basic idea is the more profit he potentially can earn from the product, then the more likely he is to work with you without trusting you. But for an average product or a low profit product, you need to establish a great deal of trust for him to work with you. So trust is a very big thing when working with distributors. And if you think about this correctly, what this means is you can give somebody less margin if you are successful at building trust with him. Okay? You have to buy that trust. If he doesn't trust you, you know, it's sort of like when you take a loan, your interest rate is going to be higher if your credit rating is lower, right? The lower the level of trust, the higher return on investment people expect. Okay, so the more you can develop trust, the more you can build up the trust, the less margin the distributor will need to work with you. Okay, if anybody has any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me later or reach out to me through LinkedIn. This is probably the most difficult slide in the book. Connie, next, please. Oh, okay. And again, this is sort of what I was talking about before in terms of focus and bandwidth. Next one, please. All right. What we very often forget is that our job is to work with and train and continue to manage the distributors. We don't just sign them on. Distributors are independent business people. Very often we say, okay, we're just, you know, we can't control them, we can't sign them on. I can tell you, just talking about the one client that I mentioned at the beginning of this, about 50% of her growth came from increased management tools of the distributors. And I can give you 2 examples. We went through the 5 worst distributors she had, and we essentially, I wrote them an email saying, you know, in 2025, we're going to be cutting some distributors. I was looking at your numbers, and I think your number should be X, and your number is actually Y, which is less than what it should be. And if it doesn't improve by December of 2024, we will have to, you know, part ways. So what can I do to help you increase your sales? And I want to say it was 10 of them, 8 of them immediately put in an order and started saying like, well, what can I do to improve my sales? Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? 2 of them resigned. And those 2 we were able to replace. So that little bit of management, that little bit of hand-holding was brought in a few $100,000. Okay. In a similar way, we started a couple of different tools for engagement, like getting everybody together once a month to have an online meeting and talk about their problems and talk about their successes and stuff like that, right? Getting out a better quality newsletter, those type of things. And those simple tools were able to drive up engagement dramatically, okay? I personally do funnel reviews with every distributor to look at what they're doing and how we can improve what they're doing, okay? And that really dramatically drives sales increases. Connie, next one, please. This is a pyramid. I like to say that a pyramid is robust, scalable, and reproducible. And that's the way a sales process should be. So I want to come up with a sales process, which I can give all of my distributors. I can walk them through it and they can scale up and it will work anywhere, right? You have pyramids in Latin America, you have them in Egypt, you have them in Africa, you have them in Asia, you have a glass pyramid in Paris, right? It's a great design. Your sales process should look like this. It should be a great design that can work anywhere with tweaks. Okay, so again, I don't say it's exactly the same in Nigeria as it is in Germany, but the fundamental structure should be similar. Connie? Hit a couple of buttons, please, because I think, yeah, it's a list. Okay, so here's some of the tools that I work with my clients. A pitch, that's what I talked about, and like, how do we pitch to the distributors? An agreement. Everybody gets agreements wrong, right? I'll tell you that already. I don't know if we have a lawyer on the call right now, but the lawyers get involved and it gets crazy. I'm going to say right now, because I'm being taped, I am not a lawyer. I'm not giving you legal advice. Don't listen to me about this. But what happens is we put in like 20 pages of stuff in the agreement that means nothing, and it just slows us down. Okay, so what we want is an agreement that says, this is what you need to do for me. And most people don't put that in. They don't say, this is the sales activities I want, right? And I always want to tell people what sales activities I want from them. I use a letter of intent because an agreement typically will take a month or more to get signed, right? Sometimes it'll take 3 months to get signed. Once you talk to a distributor, and he shakes your hand, and then you go through the legal process of getting the agreement signed. In his mind, he's working with you, but he can't sell your product because he doesn't have an agreement, but he's already looking for the next product to sell. Okay, now think about this for a second. If a distributor takes on board 4 new products a year, you have a 90-day window of opportunity to get mind share and build competence. Okay, so if you spend 50 or 60 days of that 90 days wasting time with lawyers, now your window of opportunity is 30 or 40 or 20 days before his whole sales team is thinking about the next product. Okay, so what I like to do is an LOI. The LOI basically says, this is what I do, this is my product, this is what I expect from you. I am not talking to any other distributors for the next 90 days. It is my intention to work with you if we can sign the agreement. I will pay you your commission if you sell. And typically, I get these signed the minute I decide to work with somebody. Very often, before I go to the airport, I'll say, let's sign an LOI. And then he, as far as he's concerned, he is protected and he will start selling from that day. He'll start selling my product. So an LOI can save you easily 3 months of dead space in every market you work. I always put together a playbook. I like video playbooks. I've been doing video playbooks for a few years. They are fantastic tools to keep training people. I do a lot of training videos because training videos can be dubbed into other languages. They can be subtitled, and I can use them anywhere in the world to train people. I make them available in a variety of different formats, but the online playbook is really my favorite. And I do a funnel review with every distributor. And what that basically means is I want to know what they're selling, where it's positioned in the sales process, what's going to close, what they need help with, etc.
Hey, Zach.
Yep.
Hey, Doug here. We've got about 5 minutes left.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Doug. I was going to say, let's stop here to ask questions.
Oh,
but I think that's where you were going, right?
I was mainly just making sure that you were aware of the time and just trying to help Connie. Connie, what do you think? What would you like to do?
Well, I am just awestruck. And so I'd love to hear questions that anybody has for Zach. And he has generously said that you reach out with him on LinkedIn and he'll talk to you. So who has questions for Zach? One of the things I've never heard of before, I mean, Zach, a purchasing map. I thought that was absolutely brilliant around having that. So thank you for that. So questions or comments or something, is there a question in your mind that you need to answer as a result of his presentation? Carla.
It's not so much a question, it's more of a big part of the presentation. Absolutely fantastic, Zach. I've been sat here just in awe, so thank you so much for that. I've been doing sales for a while, so listening to you and the expert has been great. Biggest part I picked up on there was your engagement side. I do feel in the industries that I work here in the UK, it is a big gap of the difference between a company having to take on the responsibility of being able to provide the tools for these people to sell. And it seems to be the missing gap. Do you find that internationally as well?
Oh, definitely. And what I always say is, if there is one thing that's going to make all the difference, it's understanding that slide. Because you know how it is, it's you can only really have a one primary focus. And if your primary focus is to drive engagement with the sales organization, right, you will be very successful. If you say, well, how, all we talk about is how to improve the product, for instance, that's great, but it honestly, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really matter, right? If the sales team isn't engaged, right? If you basically say, well, we will get more engagement if we improve the product, I can live with that, right? But my focus is always how do I drive engagement? Because everything follows the salesperson engagement. If I can keep the salesperson engagement up, and what I want to be is I want to be the number one principal, number one provider for every salesperson in my network. I am really, really sorry, Connie and Doug and everybody else. I have to drop off. I have a client meeting in 1 minute. So again, everybody is welcome to reach out to me. Thank you very much. Is there anything quick that anybody wants to say before I drop out?
Thank you. And Zach, I've saved the chat. I'll scoot it over to you. So
perfect. If you get me a list of everybody in the chat, that would be great. Thanks a lot for setting this up, Doug and Connie.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody. And feel free to reach out to me if you need to. I'm very sorry that I just, today is like back-to-back meetings. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.